This is what the debut episode of the Final Drive gonna be all about. It's gonna be all about free agency. Introduce a new segment called the Quick Slant, where I'm gonna ask Randall some random questions that he don't know, and then also at the end we gotta give our overall recap of free agency. Who won? What was the big deal, etc. But first, we gotta start off with this very odd story involving Max Crosby, the Raiders, and the Ravens. Now to recap, the Ravens traded for Max Crosby. They gave up a first and second round to the Raiders. And come to find out later on, there was a physical involved with Max Crosby that he didn't pass. And if you don't remember, Max Crosby was dealing with an injury towards the end of the season last season. So the Ravens backed out. They backed out the trade. Remember, it's not official until it wasn't official, so it was just everybody was just in agreement verbally. They backed out the trade. Max Crosby goes back to Vegas. Ravens keep their picks and flip that situation to signing Trey Hendrickson, who played for their division rival, the Cincinnati Bengals. He signed like a nice 4-year deal. And everybody was kind of up in arms about it, like, how could the Ravens back out a deal? They had an agreement. This also, like what you were saying before we start recording, put the Raiders in the awkward position because they was going to move money off the books for Max Crosby. Now Max Crosby's back on their payroll, back on their salary, and they got to find another trade partner. We don't know if they can because of what just came to light about Max Crosby physical. So let me ask you this first, Randall. Did you think the Ravens did the right thing by backing out of the trade and then signing Trey Hendrickson?
I mean, the thing is that like, I mean, if they found something like within his medical history, I mean, there's a reason why, like, every team, like, whenever a trade is made, they always say pending of passing a physical. So, like, if they saw something within that physical to where they didn't see something within his medical history or within that or maybe the injury that he had late in the season was a bit more severe than he thought. Because remember, Max Crosby was kind of like at odds with Raiders management for the last two games because he was fighting to play those last couple of games, and like because they shut him down, they wanted to shut him down the last couple of games, and he was at odds with management about it, and that was one of the reasons why he. That was basically one of the reasons why he wanted out in the first place. That was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back that made him want out in the first place. So maybe now we're starting to see that maybe the Raiders had a little bit more. Maybe the Raiders knew a little bit more about his medical history that we thought, and that maybe they were in the right to want to keep him out those last couple of games, and then because now you have basically another team verifying that there was something at odds with his medical history, and that maybe the injury that he had late in the season was more severe than he thought. And because of that, like, I mean, the Ravens are well within their rights to want to rescind that deal. If they had a contingency plan, I'm pretty sure they were already probably negotiating with Trey Hendrickson before the max. Once the legal tampering window opened up, they were probably negotiating with Trey Hendrickson as well. Before they were able to before that Max Crosby deal probably came on the table. So, once that Max Crosby deal ended up falling through, they pretty much, said, hey, they sent that, hey, big head text to, Max Crosby's agent. And, and then, and they were able to work out that deal. So, given that the history of the Ravens, well, of how they've been one of the more well-run organizations in the league, pass rush was definitely a glaring need that they had last year. Their defense took a step back, you know, as a whole last season, so they definitely needed some pass rushing help. So, that's why they went for Max Crosby in the first place. And now, they went within, they got somebody from, that they're very familiar with, Trey Hendrickson, within the, their division in the AFC North. So, they're hoping that, he still has enough left in the tank to where it can pay off for him and he can fit right in their defense and blend in with that Ravens culture. The Ravens have a great history within their defense. This is kind of one of those put up or shut up seasons for the Ravens now. This is kind of one of those building blocks to where, they now have Trey Henderson in the pass rush. I think they're definitely, but, the Ravens, they historically know how to make those kinds of moves in the draft to fill those teams to, build the rest of their team. So, I mean, I think the Trey Hendrickson signing. I think that's a good move for them. And when it comes to the Raiders and the Max Crosby situation, it's like now, there were other teams that were negotiating, willing to give up the compensation that the Ravens are willing to give up. But now that the cat's out of the bag about Max Crosby's medical history, if they are going to move off of that salary, like they're not going to be able to get. It's probably going to be for a lower price. It's probably going to be more for like maybe like a third rounder, like at best.
I don't know if you saw this, but Trey Hendrickson actually had like something cooking with the Indianapolis Colts before the Ravens jumped back on his ship and signed him to that money. And kind of lucky him because I think he's going to a better situation and he's
Mm-hmm.
staying in the AFC North. And like you, Ravens, no excuse. They got to get it done next season. They got to get at least to the AFC Championship game. But for the Ravens overall, like you said, they were well in their rights of backing out this deal. It wasn't signed on paper. It was just a verbal agreement. And look, they got their draft picks back. You still got one of the most coveted free agents in this class. You still filled up your need at pass rushing. It's a win for them. It's a fortunate situation for Max Crosby because now the news out there that you're not that healthy, like you were trying to paint yourself to be. You're going back to a team that you were at odds with, and who knows if they'll be able to move him. Like I think they'll trade him, but they definitely gotta scale back the asking price. Like they're not gonna get a first and second round pick. I think, like you said, they're going to get a third. I think they'll get a third out of this. I think they'll save face if the relationship is well beyond repair. And if the Raiders really want to save $30 million that they just took back on. So, real quick, if you're Max Crosby in this situation, do you focus on getting healthy and put in a good product as far as like being him as an individual? Do you focus in on that so that way you can get traded, or do you focus on the trade itself? Like you just want out of there, you just want the deal done. It kind of don't matter who you go to, just long as you trade it.
I think you have to just. I think in that sense, you have to just do more of the former, where it's like you have to just prove that. Like I think he has to prove, like as far as I mean, not that I mean he's already a proven player, but he just has to prove that he has to prove wrong the injury concerns. So like he has to. So like if he could just have like a full like 17 game season where he doesn't have any injuries, then I think that'll put to bed like the injury concerns, and then from there, then he could probably get to the team that he probably to a situation that he more likely wants to go to. And if he has a good season, then the Raiders can be able to beef up the compensation that they want. Maybe they could get like a second rounder, or even potentially be able to juice somebody out of a first rounder if he has a productive enough of a season.
It's going to be interesting to tell going to training camp. Hopefully they get that solved, and hopefully the Ravens they'll make out good with Trey Hendrickson down in the fold. But let's move on to perhaps even a bigger move than that, which was Super Bowl champ, Super Bowl MVP from the Seattle Seahawks, Kenneth Walker signing with the Kansas City Chiefs. And on a previous episode on the Stacey on Sports podcast on Underdog Podcast Network, we was talking about what was Kenneth Walker's worth going to be on the market, because your boy Saquon Barkley is at top dollar for his running back, making $20 million a year. Kenneth Walker just signed for essentially a little bit over $14 million per season. So he's getting paid top 7 money. He's a little bit shades on the Derrick Henry. Obviously, we know about Kenneth Walker. He's a 1,000-yard back. Like I just said, he just won Super Bowl MVP. He was just not the Super Bowl, but the entire playoff run, he was vital. Like he was the man in that offense for the Seahawks. But he's with a team that, unfortunately, they was bit by the Super Bowl loser curse, which is highlighted by them losing Pat Mahomes towards the end of the season. Now everybody's probably going to expect the Chiefs to be right back up there as far as like reaching the Super Bowl out of the AFC. But let's just talk about Kenneth Walker with this team. What you think his impact will be on the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that has been without a running game for like the last handful of years now?
Yeah, because I mean, if you really think about it, like they haven't really had like a really true like go-to guy really since like even like kind of early days like when Mahomes took over as a star when they still had Kareem Hunt in the backfield like for the first time when Kareem Hunt was still like a Pro Bowl level player. They had Tyreek Hill and Kelsey, like they had that deadly trio of weapons over there. They tried to retool it with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The first Super Bowl they had Williams in the backfield, who was serviceable for them as well. But they tried to do that with, and then Pacheco, they did win a Super Bowl with him, back in 2022. But ever since then, like he hasn't been able to stay on the field as far as injury is concerned. He hasn't been able to get back to that same level. And so, I mean, the running game has pretty much been a question mark, despite, all the Super Bowl runs Kansas City has made, it's mostly been like in spite of their running game. So I think, now, they have Eric Bieniemy back in the fold, that offensive coordinator. He's now returned to the Chiefs organization. So, and he and Eric Bieniemy was a running back himself, but he also has like a great relationship with Pat, Travis, and the and basically the main nucleus of guys that are still there from the championship teams. So, I think, having, Kenneth Walker be back into that fold with Eric Bieniemy, and I think he was the running backs coach in Chicago last year. So I do think so I do think that, having like with Eric Bieniemy back in the fold with Kenneth Walker in the backfield, I think they'll be able to incorporate him in his offense. I think they'll be able to use him in the passing game as well as the running game. Andy Reid is very well known for that, even going back to his Eagle days. When they had Brian Westbrook in the backfield. I think he's another weapon that Andy Reid can be able to get creative with in the backfield. And I think once he's able to get on the same page with Mahomes, I think they could have like a scary element in the offense. But I mean, of course, it just depends on what production they're going to get on the outside. I think that's still that still remains to be seen as far as and of course Mahomes coming off of the ACL injury, because remember he did tear, well, he didn't just tear his ACL, I think he tore his LCL too. So I mean, he did tear two ligaments in his knee. So I mean, Mahomes is going to come. We do have to see how Mahomes comes back and whether he's still going to be able to move around, because Mahomes does like to scramble and sometimes be able to buy time, buy time to throw, and he's been able to move in the past as well and use his legs in the running game as well. So we gotta see if Mahomes is still able to use that. But I do think getting Kenneth Walker in the backfield, like it creates certainty in their running game, which is something that they haven't had in a long time. So I definitely think that's a step in the right direction as far as getting their offense back to being explosive.
The only question I have about this is, are they actually going to use Kenneth Walker to his fullest potential? Are they going to use him in a similar vein like the Seattle Seahawks did, especially this past season, where he became a vital back despite him splitting carries in the red zone, especially with Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker is 1,000 yard back. Is he ever going to have like top 5 running yards in the league? I don't think so. But he's 1,000 yard back. And I always said, especially when it comes to playoffs, you gotta run the football. I don't care if you're the
Always.
Kansas City Chiefs, you got to run the football. You gotta have a running back that's going to be at least a threat back there, give you at least 75 yards, and he is that back. I just wonder how the Kansas City Chiefs are going to use him. Are they going to use him to his fullest? Because they did have talented running backs come through there, but for some reason they just did not work out in that system. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he was the 25th overall pick from the Kansas City Chiefs. Isaiah Pacheco had talent, but it just never realized into something that could be great for him. And then also there are questions that Kenneth Walker a feature back? Is he a true feature back where you give him 80% of the carries? And for him getting paid over $14 million a season over the next 3 seasons, about $29 million guaranteed for his contract, he got to be that feature back. He got to put up those numbers. So it remains to be seen. Like, but overall, I like the signing, but I just hope that they use him greatly.
You get asked that question pretty much with all these running back signings because because I even had that question even when the Eagles first signed Saquon because given that teams are and especially offensive minded head coaches typically want to be so pass happy and want to throw the ball 40 times a game. you know like it seems like that like even if they have like a Saquon or even a Derrick Henry type of running back, a lot of these teams will try to get cute. I mean, even the first four games of the Eagles, Super Bowl season with Saquon, like the first four games, like Saquon wasn't getting like the amount of he wasn't getting as many touches, as much as he should. And like, during the bye week, a lot of the Lane Johnson, a lot of the elder statesmen on the offensive line, they kind of went to Sirianni and, they wanted that says like, hey man, we need to emphasize, running the football a little bit more. And then, thankfully Sirianni, was able to listen and, the rest was history. But it's just like, a lot of times, and even with, obviously Andy Reid's the first ballot Hall game coach and obviously he's forgotten more football than both of us know combined, but there are sometimes like especially in this era of Kansas City like that has been a criticism of him is that sometimes he may not go to the running game sometimes or sometimes that may not always be a little bit be as much of an emphasis. So I think a lot of offensive minded head coaches. I mean, you're a Rams fan. Sometimes you got Kyron Williams in the backfield. You got Puka and Devontae Adams. It's like it gets very tempting to just always want to air it out. So it's like it's always like a slippery slope to it, where it's like if teams find that balance of running and passing it. So that's always a question mark when it comes to any of these running back signings. Is like are they going to be vital parts of the offense, or are they going to use them for parts of the year and then they end up being phased out to where they end up being taken out during third downs, so that's always a tricky question to ask. So
I feel like there's a difference between Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Walker. Like
yeah,
Saquon, you like Saquon is that type of talent. You better have your offense ready for him. And I feel like Kenneth Walker is not that type of running back, but he should be given what he done in the playoffs, in the Super Bowl, and the money that just signed. This is a big investment I got by the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think like I said, they drafted a running back in the first round, but they ain't never really spent no money on a running back like this. So hopefully they can tailor it all. Because like you were saying, their their receiving game is questionable now because Travis Kelsey on his last legs. We don't know if Rashid Rice gonna get suspended another 6 games this season, and you got things working like that. So we'll see, we'll see. But let me ask you this real quick to wrap it up. Do you think them signing Kenneth Walker, and then let's imagine Pat Mahomes is healthy, the wide receiver Rashid Rice is on the field, defense playing good. Do you think this is a Super Bowl move right here?
I think it's a step in the right direction to be in a Super Bowl move, but like this alone is not gonna put them over the top, like to be in a Super Bowl team. Because to me, like I think one of the main reasons why Kansas City took a step back last season, even before Mahomes' injury towards the end of the year, is I thought they took a step back on the defensive side of the ball. And I definitely think in the draft they definitely need to still address some of their offensive line issues. Like I think they need to like get more offensive line depth in that sense. With a healthy Patrick Mahomes, like I think they definitely can get back to being a playoff team. But I think but we also got to keep in mind like they're in the AFC West. I think the rest of the division, like Denver, went to the AFC Championship game last year, and they got and the Chargers, they were they're an 11-win team. They're still at least they still win enough. They still been a solid regular season team, so they're still now, they still got to prove themselves as a playoff team, but, they're still a tough team in the regular season. But, so I think Kansas City, they still need to address some other holes in the roster before I put them back to being a Super Bowl team. But I think if Mahomes can get back to, healthy and, he can, get on the same page with some of the weapons around him, then, Kansas City will always be a dangerous team.
All right, let's get to this brand new segment called the Quick Slant, where
I'm ready for this.
I, yeah, it's random questions. I did not prepare random for, and I just want to see if he can get a quick answer, if he can catch on. Randall, you ready?
All right, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. First question: Kyler Murray is going to the Minnesota Vikings. Will this put the Minnesota Vikings on top of the NFC North?
On top of the NFC North, that'll be no. I still think the Chicago Bears. I think the Chicago Bears are in that division. The Green Bay Packers are in that division. I think Kyler Murray could be able to get them, like, if he gets back to playing, like, if he gets back to being at playing at like his peak level, like, I think he could be good enough to be able to, like, challenge for a wild card spot. But as far as winning the division, no.
Question number 2. The Indianapolis Colts just extended Daniel Jones. He is now making $44 million
Oh Jesus!
a season over the next 2 seasons with the Indianapolis Colts. Do you believe in Daniel Jones as far as him pushing the Colts into the playoffs? Because remember, they were like 8-2 before he went down with an injury.
I mean, I still think the jury's out when it comes to, like, trusting him as, like, the long-term answer. And, like, for him to still be making, like, I mean, he's gonna be making still like $44 million, basically around what he was making, like, in his previous contract with the Giants. So I mean, just playing well in the first half of last season was enough to get him that extension alone. So I mean, my goodness, man, and, like, the thing is, he's still coming off of an Achilles injury, so it's like, I mean, to have that much faith in him, and, like, and he's a guy that has to move around too. Like, he's a guy that uses his legs, so it's like he's coming off of an Achilles injury. Is he still going to be able to be as mobile as he once was? Because he's not, like, that great as far as raw throwing ability. So I mean, like, I just think that's just a huge question mark on the Colts' part, man. Like, I mean, coming off that injury, like, I can understand, like, either franchising him or or doing something to that effect. Like, if you're gonna, like, take a, like, all right, like, we're gonna just, we're gonna see if you can prove it again next year. I can understand the Colts doing that, but, like, just agreeing to an extension like this already, man, it's like, I know the Colts have wanted, like, stability at quarterback, but it's just like,
Romeo Doubs goes from the Packers to the Patriots. The Patriots need a number 1 wide receiver. Can Romeo Doubs become a Pro Bowler with the New England Patriots with Drake May throwing him the ball?
I don't know about Pro Bowl level, but I think he gives him. I think he's a solid guy in the receiving core. I do like Romeo Dawson. What I saw from him in the Packers. I mean, I think he was kind of amongst, like, ragtag of receivers. There was still, like, Jaden Reed that was there. There was still Christian Watson. There was a lot of receivers. Trying to fight for some shine. They drafted Matthew Golden last year. So I think now, like, I think for him, I think he gives him I think this is an opportunity for him to kind of establish himself and make a name for himself, and kind of, prove himself, to see if he can prove himself to be at a Pro Bowl level. Now, I think he's shown, like, some flashes. I like some of his ability, but, like, I don't know if it's necessarily Pro Bowl level, but I do think he has, like, a potential to be, like, a high level number 2. Like, I think he definitely has that potential.
Last year, he had over 50 catches, over 700 yards with the Packers. So he signed money to where he could be 1,000-yard receiver. That remains to be seen. But shout out to Romeo Doubs. Let's just put a whole recap on this free agency period. There was a lot of big signings, a lot of movements, a lot of teams seemingly improve on paper. But overall, who you think won free agency, or what would you think was the biggest move, preferably what we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I think the best move, like, in free agency, and I think you're gonna like this answer, States, was the Trent McDuffie trade to the LA Rams. I think when you look at, the glaring weakness of the Rams, like, that you saw from last season, the main, they saw, like, even on their defense, they still had, guys like, in the front line, like, Verse and, Kobe Turner, still making plays. Landman, rose up at linebacker, but the glaring weaknesses was on that secondary. And, JSN had a monster NFC Championship game. And the playoffs have a way of, showing like your glaring weaknesses have a way of showing up in postseason play. And unfortunately for the Rams, the secondary, like they weren't able to make enough plays, and they got torched, most of the game. So they went out and addressed that. And I looked up Trent McDuffie, man, like he still like was under his rookie contract. So I mean, this is his first big contract that he signed with the Rams. They traded for him. They agreed to an extension right away, and you're bringing in a 25-year-old corner, like shut down corner, like basically like entering his prime. So I mean, like that's another domino effect that you add to their defense. Now I mean, I think they still have to now they're gonna have to pay Jarrett Verse like within the next couple of years, but we'll see. But now if Stafford, like if this ends up being his last season, then we could see a scenario where like they'll finally be able to pay some of those guys on their defense, and then we'll see what they do at quarterback after that. But but as far as like in the immediate future, like now you're establishing like you have someone, a go-to guy in the secondary. It's similar to what they did when they traded for Jalen Ramsey. Like they traded for Jalen Ramsey before his first big deal, and they got like the peak years of Jalen Ramsey. So now you're seeing Les Snead, once again, one of the better general managers in the league. I think that was the best move like within free agency so far, and I think it's in you add a like cornerstone piece to what was already like a championship caliber team.
Yeah, and guess where the Super Bowl is in 2027?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in LA at SoFi. And,
Yeah, yeah.
the
Let's
last
do
time
it
the
again.
Rams and the last time the Rams were able to make it to the Super Bowl at SoFi, so we'll see if that could. I mean, that could be. That was the last game for Andrew Whitworth. So I don't know if this is going to be the last game for Matthew Stafford.
Hey,
So
I don't mind
that could
that,
be a
man.
storybook ending for Stafford's career. So we'll see.
Yeah,
So that could be. So
absolutely.
I think that's a step in the right direction for the Rams in making that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's hope for that. My big winner of free agency, and we talked about this team already, kind of, but we didn't talk about their moves necessarily. Um, I like what the Las Vegas Raiders have done. They signed Tyler Linderbaum from the Baltimore Ravens, gave him a 3-year contract. I think 3 years, $81 million. So you sign somebody that's used to being a part of a pretty decent offensive line. You bring that over to the Raiders, who have suffered in the trenches for multiple years. Then also them signing the Kobe Dean, trading for Teron Johnson from the Buffalo Bills. Just they're building an identity there that's laced with veterans. And then we both presume they're going to pick Mendoza. Mendoza's going to walk into a good situation. I like what the Raiders. I like what they've done. I think they signed some pretty good free agents. And I'm looking for them to improve. I don't know how much they're going to improve by having a rookie quarterback, presumably, but I like what they're doing though.
Yeah, I mean, I just I like the. I mean, the Kobe. I mean, the Kobe Dean. Like, we're definitely gonna miss him. With the Eagles, but
Mhm.
but he does have a. But I mean, he has had issues staying on the field. So I mean, I kind of expected the Eagles to let him go. So but I mean, he does bring that leadership. But like if he's on the field, like he is a monster. Like he definitely could be like that mainstay at linebacker. So I definitely like that move for the Raiders. But I just think that but I think they're another team like the Dolphins where like they just need a massive overhaul as far as establishing an identity. And I mean the Raiders, they definitely always like they usually have money to spend, but just historically like a lot of the Raiders free agent signings haven't always worked out for them, man. So I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
I, you hope that they can finally start heading in the right direction, but it's just like some of the history, man, of like some of their just from the front office, man. It hasn't been good, man. So I mean, until they get that infrastructure in place, man, uh, I think it remains to be seen when it comes to the Raiders.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And then my honorable mentions, real quick, the Dallas Cowboys. I like what they did in free agency. They got some veterans on their defense, which they needed, and Daniel Jones for securing 2 years, $88 million off of 10 games. Shout out to Daniel Jones.
Shout out to Daniel Jones' bank account.
Yeah.
Or, or,
Oh,
or, or like his accountant.
yeah. Oh man. Shout out to everybody involved over there. The whole Daniel Jones group over there, man. That big money coming in the pockets. But this is the end of the Final Drive premiere episode. Our show on Stacey on Sports dedicated to football. I am your host, Stacey Carter II, joined by Randall Hamilton. Follow us everywhere on social media at Stacey on Sports. Keep a lookout for our football content, especially the draft. Randall, thank you for reminding me that the NFL draft does exist. But until next time, take it easy, y'all. Enjoy some football. Stacey on Sports, the now of sports media.